God gives the specifics in the 31,000 verses of the Bible. Remember, there are 31,103 verses in the Bible. Of these, about 27%, so more than a fourth, or over 8,000 or 7,900 verses, are prophetic. There are people that have spent their whole life sorting them. The ones that have already been answered, fulfilled, like Israel coming out of Egypt, like Jesus being born in Bethlehem, and all those things. And so there are about 2,000 verses in the Bible that haven't been fulfilled yet. By everybody that looks at them, they say this hasn't happened yet. If you take those and sort them, there are about 215 different events. And so we're only going to talk about a few of those specific events. But basically, to understand prophecy, we step back before Revelation. And we start in Matthew chapter 6. If you see that, Jesus introduced biblical prophecy by this prayer note that he gives us. He says we're supposed to be continually praying in verse 10 of chapter 6, your kingdom come. And so you have to think about what kingdom are we talking about and how is it going to come? And that's what he wanted on our minds all the time. So Jesus introduces this. Then he outlines it in Matthew 24. And this is what he says as we get to Matthew 24. And this is what I meant about Jesus is the one that brought this up. Matthew 24, Jesus went out, departed from the temple. His disciples showed him the buildings as if he didn't know anything about them. And Jesus said to them, do you see all these buildings? Herod's incredible temple. Herod kept his personal treasures hung in the temple. It says that he made a beautiful vine and branches that extended for yards of solid gold. I mean, it was like he was showing off his treasures. Do you see all these things? Assuredly, I say, Jesus said, verse 2, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down. That's one of my favorite verses. Every time I take people to Israel, I have them sit on the pile of stones, the ones that used to be part of Herod's temple complex up there, that were pried loose and thrown by the Roman legionnaires under Titus to make massive piles. And you can go, when you go to Israel, if you've already been, you can stand there and look at that pile, and sometimes they have ropes around it, and often they don't. You can sit on that pile. I call it the most visible fulfillment of prophecy you can ever experience. That Jesus said, not one stone that would not be thrown violently down, and there they are. Now, verse 3, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. So obviously Jesus said this in front of everybody at the temple. But privately they say, tell us when these things will be. Now look at this. And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end? How it all ends. How are we going to know? And Jesus answered and said to them, and thus comes the outline that we see in Matthew 24. And basically Jesus says in verse 8, all of these things, this series of items he mentioned that we've all heard of, famines and pestilences and earthquakes and all this, they're the beginning of sorrows. So Jesus says an outline. Then it's illustrated, as we're going to see, in Revelation 6 through 19. So basically, we've moved now to that next part of the book of Revelation. We've gone from Christ's church on earth and Christ's church in heaven to the tribulation events that are going back and forth between heaven and earth. So we've gone from the church on earth to now the church in heaven, and that big red block there is the tribulation, and that's what we're going to talk about. And basically what Jesus does is he gives us specific trends. Birth pains. Now, birth pains, all of you who were born and your mother went through a process. And my mother, told my dad that she's starting to feel something, and then she started feeling it more, and then they were closer together, and then when mom can't talk, you're really getting close. When she's totally gripped by those birth pains. That's how Jesus described it. But what's interesting, he does something with the whole list. He said, all of these things are just the beginning of birth pains. Verse 33, so you also, when you see all of these things, know it's near. It's at the doors. Verse 34, assuredly, Jesus is talking here. Jesus is explaining to the disciples who want to know what's the end of the world. How do we know? Verse 34, assuredly I say unto you, this generation will by no means pass away till all of these things. So what he says is it's a compact, very close together, rapid event. And that picks up in the book of Revelation. In fact, when you read Revelation, Jesus said, the things which must shortly, take, Greek word, like tachometer, showing the speed. It's something that comes speedily when it begins. So if we were to compare the Olivet Discourse, that's Matthew 24, with the first 6 seals, that's what I mean by the outline. Look, Jesus first talks about, in Matthew 24, 4 and 5, false Christ. In chapter 6 of Revelation 1 and 2, the false Messiah, the white horse. Then we have war in 6 and 7. Then we have the first of the mentions of the horrors, which is the red horse or warfare. Then we have famine in Matthew. We have the black horse of famine. We have death by so many means in 24:9. Then we have this pale green chloros horse that Revelation describes. Then we have the martyrdom Jesus warned about in 9 to 13 of Matthew. Then we have the 5th seal, seeing all the martyrs around the throne. And then Luke 21, by the way, Jesus gives the same message 3 times. Or I should say it's recorded 3 different ways in the Gospels. Matthew 24 and 25, then Mark 13, and then Luke 21. So in Luke 21, there's this emphasis on the signs, which are all mentioned in the 6th seal. But what we see is Jesus talks about these end-of-the-world trends, these birth pains. The characteristic is they'll be more visible, they'll be more frequent, they'll be more intense, and they'll have a deeper impact on the world. Now, everything I'm going to show you today has always been around. Everything. We've had all these people trying to ruin the world. We've had bad weather. We've had earthquakes everywhere all over the world. We've had famines all over the world. We've had plagues all over the world. You understand what I mean? That's what Jesus said. He said, don't be alarmed by all these. Don't be troubled, Matthew 24:6. For all these things must come to pass, all these terrible things, and the nations rising against nations, and kingdoms against kingdoms, and famines and pestilences and earthquakes in various places. But he said all those are the beginning of this crescendo down to a point where mom can't talk, can't move because the baby's coming. And he said, you'll know when everything I'm talking about, Jesus says, when everybody is watching it, not just the people that lived near the earthquake of 1099 AD, not just the people that were in the Black Death of Europe in 14 whatever AD, but everybody on earth. That's what Jesus talks about, the visibility. And they're not going to just be one thing, they're going to be frequent things, and they're not just going to be hitting, they're going to be hitting intensely. So everybody is watching, and it's affecting everybody. Well, what are end-of-the-world trends that we can pick up? If you look at Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and then you look at what Paul says on this, and then John, well, global diseases will get more lethal. We've always had global diseases. Every time they excavate some new, pharaonic site in Egypt, they're examining what diseases they have. They look at their bones, they look at their teeth, they look at the structure of their body. We've always had global diseases that are going to get more lethal. We've always had global warming. You can see that if you study tree rings, you see there's been cycles of warming and cooling, but never at the rate we're looking at right now, where everyone is, it's like everybody's saying, whoa, what's happening? So global warming is going to get hotter. Global water shortages are going to get worse. Global food scarcity. The United Nations just announced that we're going to run out of food in the world in 17 years. And then they followed up with a report saying that 90% of all people's calories come from 3 basic crops. And you all know that, rice, corn, and wheat. And if there's any blight that hits rice, corn, and wheat, we're in trouble because we have made our diet around what we can rapidly farm. There's going to be global food scarcity. The United Nations says between 17 and 27 years, whoever's alive then, it's going to be a struggle to get enough food for you and your family. Of course, there's always predictions like that. There are going to be global conflicts, but they're just going to get bigger and deadlier. Boy, everyone is watching what's going on right now in Europe. Global hatred for Christ, which has always been around since Christ was, treated so badly, then crucified, and then his followers martyred by the hundreds of thousands. But it's going to get more personal. It's not just we're against Christians, we're against you if you're a Christian. And then global tracking is more complete, and it's fascinating to watch.